November 27, 2025. It's the fourth year, day 277, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Welcome, I greet you, to the Daily Situation Report. Above all, I welcome the ALGO crew and the channel members, from the teams to the staff officers. Breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. After Ukraine more or less agreed to the new peace plan and showed unity with the United States of America, Putin claimed that they can't sign an agreement at all. Because in his opinion, Ukraine doesn't even have a legitimate government. So Putin doesn't want peace at all and just wanted to keep stalling for time the whole time. Well, that's strange. How can that be? That's really strange for everyone who still doesn't know what's meant. According to Putin, Zelensky should have held new elections after his term in office. That's actually correct. He's right about that. But that applies to times of peace. However, the country is in a war, and during a war, the current government remains in place. That's anchored in the Constitution, and it's common practice in every other country as well, including here in Germany. That's why it's inexplicable how anyone can defend such nonsense. I'm not talking about Putin, but about our fellow citizens, since Putin already knows the government is legitimate. He also knows that in this war, they won't be holding any new elections. With this, he has found a non-negotiable point which he could use as a demand for possible negotiations. That's like me saying I might be willing to sit half naked in front of the camera during the next live stream, but only if the channel hits 100,000 subscribers by tomorrow. That's a safe bet for me since I know it won't happen. And that's exactly how it is here too. And even if, let's just assume there were new elections tomorrow, they would be counted. Then, Putin would simply claim, if Zelensky won again, that the elections were obviously rigged. And if he didn't win, and his successor, who isn't as pro-Russian as he hopes, then he would just make the same claim again. They're still under the old government's control or manipulation, until he finally has a man in there who benefits him in negotiations. I mean, of course, in the case of a surrender. The fighting continues in the city of Pokrovsk. There's also a new geolocation here, pretty much in the center of the city, right here at the red pin. There's a Russian infantry fighting vehicle that was attacked right here in the center by 3 drones. The Russians overturned it inside a building. However, it was in a damaged shelter, which was very accessible to drones since they could just fly right in. Take a look at the infantry fighting vehicle. The Russians have attached barbed wire on top for drone defense. It's a problem if it attacks from the side. Especially with a stationary target, you have quite a bit of time to find the weak spot and fly towards it. The whole thing took place south of the train station at the red pin, which is why the surrounding area was marked as Russian-dominated. That wouldn't be possible if many Ukrainian soldiers were still here. I mean, moving the tank. What's really interesting here is the question of how they even managed to get the vehicle so far north in the city without being noticed. Near Pokrovsk, the drone density is extremely high on both sides, and the Russians generally hardly drive armored vehicles or transporters into the city because there are so many drones around. However, about a week ago, the weather was pretty bad. We're talking about rain, strong winds, and fog. Under those conditions, drones usually don't fly, which creates a small window of time where you can avoid the danger. Of course, it's quite possible that the Russians deliberately use this window of time, and I'm also pretty sure about that. The videos in which they filmed themselves driving into the city were recorded exclusively in bad weather, for example, in heavy fog. Of course, that makes you wonder how long the vehicle has already been here on site. In the southern area of Myrnohrad, there was another territorial change. The Russians are attacking here via the village of Promian, which is located at this spot, and they're attacking here along the road. I already reported that the Russians were also spotted in the village here on occasion. However, I wasn't sure how far they were able to advance and how much of the village they control. Because up here in this artillery zone, they recently launched a heavy artillery attack. That means the Ukrainians were present here at that time, and we assumed that the Russians couldn't advance any further than that point. But now there is confirmation that the eastern part of the town is firmly under their control, which is why I've only moved the front line up to this point. Most Ukrainian losses occur outside cities like Myrnohrad or Pokrovsk, where drone and artillery threats have risen sharply. Up here, on this road, right at the intersection at the blue pin. A video was recorded there that mostly shows Ukrainian vehicle losses. This whole area here is like a small bottleneck that the Ukrainians control and use to supply the soldiers in the village or try to get them out. Many of the trips take place at night without any lights, under the cover of darkness, preferably in bad weather. However, when rotating and evacuating the wounded, you can't always wait for the best weather or the best conditions. The risk means that some vehicles, including their crews, can be lost. The situation is still bad, even though the front line only shifted slightly once this week. We can see that very clearly here on the situation map. How did it come to this? As I've mentioned many times before, the whole situation strongly reminds me of the retreat from Avdiivka. Quite uncontrolled and uncoordinated, and above all, much too late. You can't sugarcoat the situation, not even on the Ukrainian side. Now they have the problem of getting many soldiers out of Münnerath through a small bottleneck, which the Russians are constantly shelling with artillery or monitoring with drones. Nor on the Russian side, which has lost well over 250,000 soldiers for the territory, gained since the beginning of the battle for Pokrovsk. In my opinion, the losses at the new vehicle graveyard could have been absolutely avoided if they had reacted earlier. The viewers who have been with us for a while know how often I have warned about exactly this situation, because I kept seeing it coming, and now we see the result of that. The strategy of the Ukrainian General Staff to hold this position at Myrnohrad would only make sense if the Russian army on this section were on the verge of collapse. But that's not the case. There would be no more positions behind the city, which isn't true, since these have been painstakingly constructed over the past few months. Or if you want to plan a counterattack to expand the pocket from the inside, destroy the Russian logistics, and thereby isolate and fight scattered units in rapid engagements. But I can't imagine that, because then they would have to move a huge number of units through the same small bottleneck where there's now a vehicle graveyard. I know that among my regular viewers, there's a retired general and at least 2 staff officers. Your opinion on this would be very important to me. Maybe you could leave your assessment in the comments. By the way, I found a video here showing the Russians evacuating a wounded soldier with a quad bike. It seems to work no matter what it looks like. The Russians are unbeatable at improvising, probably because they don't care about the consequences anyway. For example, in a drone attack, he can't free himself, and the drone basically gets a tied-up target thrown right at its feet. A Russian multiple rocket launcher is spotted by a drone and destroyed by another. I find it particularly interesting here that you can even clearly see the camouflage net covering the vehicle in the video. While a regular drone might not have detected it at all, this way it's possible to spot and engage covered vehicles as well. It exploded completely after being hit, probably because it was loaded with ammunition and then just stored there. The second to last Russian drone attack on Ukraine caused some of the drones to come down in Moldova. For this reason, they summoned the Russian ambassador to discuss the incidents. He was greeted by one of the drones. Take a look at how his facial expression changes as he leaves, almost as if he's wondering whether they removed the warhead beforehand. Personally, pretty good. They should definitely see why they've been summoned. Politico reports that Europe is now considering something that once seemed unthinkable. And at this point, I have to say right away, considering something is very, very typical for Europe. We often see that something is being considered or discussed, and then you never hear about it again. And that's a big problem. But the news was still worth something. And specifically, they're considering carrying out a counterstrike against Russia. After repeated provocations, drone and aircraft attacks, global positioning system interference, railway sabotage, and disinformation, European Union and NATO members are considering launching cyber attacks on targets that are crucial to Russia's war efforts. These include the Alabuga drone center, energy facilities, or weapon transport routes. NATO could also respond to another sabotage attempt with sudden military exercises near Estonia's border with Russia. We've seen that, of course, they don't bring too much, like, for example, with the airspace surveillance over Poland. The Allies are even launching some information campaigns that are directly aimed at the Russian public. That might actually be a really good point. And as I've often said, we're in a war, not one that can be fought on the battlefield, but a diplomatic and at the same time hybrid war. And the West is losing this one by a wide margin. Russia has absolute superiority here. Russian disinformation has advanced so far in the minds of our citizens that we're already arguing with each other. Many people think there was an agreement about NATO's eastward expansion, even though Gorbachev himself said that such an agreement never even existed, or that the West is to blame for this war, or that fictional territorial gains are being reported, or that NATO soldiers are fighting in the war and falling one after another. You know it yourself. Russian aircraft continue entering our airspace while hacker attacks from Russia constantly threaten NATO. Germany is ranked 8th among the most attacked countries in the world, and this month it's even ranked 1st. We can be glad that our digitalization still mostly consists of printing things out and scanning them again, and that pneumatic tube systems are still commonly used alongside outdated fax machines. It's time that we stop putting up with everything in this hybrid war and finally start defending ourselves. Because Russia attacks us day after day. Special thanks to the ALGE crew channel members, especially Lieutenant Colonel Renicky. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next situation report.